political will, the political rhetoric is there. There are some very good statements that are coming out of government. The government has made a big swing in the last election. So it is early days yet with the new administration to understand exactly how they're going to translate their policies into action. There's a lot of skepticism about whether it's just words and whether it will translate into action. But their track record in the last year has not been too bad, which has surprised a lot of people. So there's cautious optimism at the moment. But you know, at the next election, things could change dramatically.
And that's happening in...
What?
When is the next election?
We've got another 4 years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And the political landscape is very fluid at the moment. And there's a growing sense that we will have a much stronger opposition the next time around. The current ANC government has had an absolute majority in the last few elections. So they've had a lot of central power to be able to push through what they want to push through. That might change in the next election. But it's, you know, politics, it's hard to call. So a lot can change between now and the next election. So.
Actually, the lesson from the energy sector from South Africa can be one lesson that applies to a lot of development countries.
Yeah.
You know, like grappling with development forces and incentive for climate change mitigation.
Yeah.
So, how do you see the two forces coexist, or can they coexist, or are they totally against one another?
No, they can coexist. It's finding the balance between addressing the other needs and the mitigation needs. We've just completed the long-term mitigation strategy plan for South Africa, which is an amazing document. It's somewhat analogous to our constitution. I mean, we have one of the most liberal, rights-orientated constitutions on the planet. Translating that constitution into practice is going to take a generation or longer, because we come out of a very restricted society. But the rights are entrenched in the constitution. The long-term mitigation strategy is an adopted framework by government, by central government, that talks about how we're going to address mitigation. But I think it's the same thing. The right statements are in there. The very good policy statements are in there. It's going to take time to find the balance of how to translate that relative to the shorter-term stress that society is facing.
So the problem you see would be the time needed for those forces to kind of find a good balance.
Find a good balance, yeah. And the danger, of course, is that we get polarized. And if you talk to South Africans who've left South Africa, you'll probably find negative views. And you talk to the South Africans who've chosen to stay in South Africa, you'll find an optimistic view. Because if you're going to live in South Africa, you've got to be optimistic. So I tend to be optimistic. And I see positive signs. I mean, we have big crime problems. We have lots of other societal problems. But the move is in the positive direction. And so far, we haven't torn ourselves apart. And much of the outside world expected South Africa to tear itself apart after apartheid. And that hasn't happened. And I think it's indicative of the amazing patience and willingness to work through a problem that you find in South Africa, or that you find in Africa, not just South Africa, which I think is fairly unique. You wouldn't find that in France or wherever, one of the developed nations. You'd have much more impatient society who wouldn't sit with it for a while.